This is a video that I've been asked by a couple of people to put together. It is going to be actually quite similar, I think, to a video that Growling Sidewinder very recently published as well on his channel. I'm going to provide a link to Growling Sidewinder's video. It's well worth a watch, and I think a lot of the things I'm going to say are also things that Growling himself has said. I'm going to try and distinguish my video then slightly from his by focusing on warbirds flying, so hopefully that will be interesting for the people who mainly watch my channel. And I'm going to be breaking down the content into the following sections. There will be timestamps in the description below, so you can skip to the section you want to view. I'm going to start off by talking about the setup installation of the VR headset versus TrackIR. I want to talk then a bit about the ergonomics, kind of the physical impacts of using the VR headset. A discussion on visual quality and performance will follow after that, and then I'm going to talk about two kind of flying related aspects. The first being just general flying, and then discussing in some slightly more detail combat flying in particular, with a little conclusion at the end of the video. I have been flying with VR now just about a month. That's considerably less than a lot of other people. I made the transition from TrackIR when I decided I could put some money towards a headset. I've been using TrackIR then for a number of years prior to this in DCS and in Cliffs of Dover and a couple of other titles. The specific set I've got, the headset, is the Reverb G2, and I always post my other wider PC specs in my video descriptions, but the relevant ones are that my processor is a 3700X from AMD, I use a 2080 Ti graphics card from NVIDIA, so not a top-of-the-line card. I've got 64 gigs of RAM, and I'm using an X570 motherboard. I have M2 drive and various other peripherals which aren't so relevant. So my experience in terms of performance is not going to be quite as good as Growling Sidewinder's. It's not also going to be quite as good as those chaps and ladies who have the most up-to-date PCs, but I think my setup is pretty indicative of a lot of DCS players. Let's move on then to the key content of the video. Setup. Okay, overall, I would say in a nutshell that TrackIR is much easier to set up and install. The main issue when installing TrackIR is fixing the clips onto the monitor and your headset or your cap or whatever you're using for the tracking. I've fiddled around a bit with those in the past, having to use Bluetooth solutions, and some of the modern thin monitors don't work so well with the TrackIR receiver, but overall it's really neither here nor there. The other issue that you can find with setting up TrackIR is getting a profile that suits you, but fortunately sharing profiles is really easy. They're just simple database Excel, I think, files, and so you can just share the profiles with each other. It's pretty basic stuff. So TrackIR, pretty basic when it comes to setup. VR, on the other hand, is pretty frustrating right from the start. So there are multiple programs that you have to have running in order to get your VR set to work with any specific game. For DCS, this means running Windows Mixed Media something and a Steam VR, which comes with Steam. There are other software programs that you need to install then to make the VR headset work with other sims, so it's certainly not a case of just installing one software that comes with the headset. I've also had issues with the USB ports themselves. Plugging into some USB ports worked, plugging into others didn't. Some people find they have to use a hub, others plug directly into a graphics card. Unfortunately, the headset I've got has a USB C plug, which only plugs into a limited set of graphics cards. Fortunately, the 2080 Ti has the USB-C plug, but I found that worked for a few days and then it stopped working and I had to unplug it and plug it into a USB port that was directly connected to my motherboard. So frustrations all around with the cabling and finding a USB port that would work. In addition, there's a shit ton of new parameters that govern the performance and the visual quality with VR headsets, which you'll have to get your head around. These include loads of variables and parameters that belong to the headset itself and the headset software, and then a whole bunch of new ones that belong to DCS, in addition to the graphics options that the player is already used to from TrackIR. So VR is definitely not, in any sense of the word, plug and play. It's more like plug and check and then unplug and then fiddle and then plug in again and then unplug and then plug back in, reset the computer, wait, plug it in, plug it out again, check something, unplug it, then plug it in again, load DCS, only for it to all go mental, and then you have to start from the beginning again. Now, I needed about 2 hours, maybe more, sitting down on comms with Burrito from JG53. He's got a lot of experience with VR, and he talked me through the setup steps. A couple of hours to basically get it at least working, not necessarily tweaked, but functioning. Had I had to rely on manuals and text-based guides and videos, I think it would have been days of setup. So setting up, installing VR, really quite frustrating in comparison to the ease of TrackIR. On to the next topic then, ergonomics. So the VR headset is heavier. It is overall less comfortable than TrackIR. As Growling Sidewinder pointed out in his video, it does get hot and sweaty with the VR headset on. And I find that if I fly for about 45-50 minutes, then it's time to take a break. It's not that you sit there suffocating, it is just that you've got a rubber or a foam object pressed up against your face and you will generate heat on your face and you start sweating. And if you move the headset up onto your head, if you've got long hair, for example, which mine is moderately short, but if you've got long hair, you move the headset up on your head for a while and then you put it back over your eyes, any oils or hair product in your hair will brush off onto the lenses and then you end up with smears all over your lenses. So every time you want to take the helmet away from your eyes, you kind of have to remove it completely from your face, unless you've got short hair. The one-to-one movement that is required in order to look around with a VR headset will place you at a severe disadvantage if you have mobility issues, particularly with your neck and your upper torso. Now, fortunately for me, it's actually helped me, I think, be more mobile. Moving my head around a lot more has actually helped work some muscle groups that I'm guessing were probably not very well worked sitting in front of a PC for most of my time with work and then often in the evenings with TrackIR. So it depends on your muscular makeup. Some people report a lot of discomfort and stiffness after using the VR headsets, but for me it's been generally okay and possibly actually helped improve my neck and torso mobility. I have suffered absolutely no nausea at all when trying out the headset. Now, I don't suffer from motion sickness at all in real life either, so it's possibly related to that, but I know that some people are really quite badly affected by motion sickness with the headsets on, but it's not something I've experienced. The cables can be a bit of an issue. My gaming setup is moderately clean and cable free. I do have some audio cables and a couple of control cables kind of floating around my knees and in front of me, but it's not too bad. The cable on the VR headset I've got is a little bit heavy and a bit annoying, but then again, TrackIR cables can also be a bit of a problem as well. So I don't see a huge difference between the two options in terms of how the cabling situation works. I also wear my own speaker headset, my own headphones, over the top of the VR headset. So I removed the native speakers that have come with my headset, and I've got this quite broad banded set of headphones over the top. That adds obviously weight, it adds heat, and it adds more cabling to the whole setup. For me, it's starting to get borderline uncomfortable with all the gear I've now got sitting on my face. Access to your keyboard is another issue. I've had to rebind lots of key bindings that I used to just have on my keyboard that I could look down and tap. I've now had to rebind them off my keyboard onto my HOTAS. I've also had to move more onto my Stream Decks. The Stream Decks are quite well lit, the buttons are well lit, and you can customize all of the icons on the Stream Decks. And by removing the small rubber seal on my nose on the VR headset, I can just glance down my nose onto my Stream Decks. So I can operate key sort of based inputs down in front of me on the desk, but it's not nearly as easy as it is with TrackIR. However, on the plus side, the fact that the DCS cockpits are all clickable really, really helps with VR from an ergonomics point of view. I'm now finding I'm using the mouse far more often to operate parts of the cockpit which I would previously have bound to a key binding, and so therefore there are far fewer key bindings for me to remember because I'm using the mouse more. I'm actually kind of leaning into parts of the cockpit and physically clicking on things. And I think that also plays into the fact that DCS has these clickable cockpits. It just makes the use of the VR headset more sensible. VR will lock you into the game more. This is kind of a physiological thing, right? You can't see out of your VR headset really. You have the headphones on, or at least I do, and if you've got that rubber guard on your nose, your entire face and your whole mind is locked in to DCS. So from an experience point of view, which we'll come to later, this can be better, but from a physiological point of view, especially you live in a house where people might be expecting your attention when you're gaming, or you might have other things to respond to, VR just totally shuts you off from the rest of the world. So that could be seen as a positive or a negative depending on your real world kind of living situation. Kind of to summarize this whole ergonomics question, TrackIR is hands down far more ergonomically acceptable. VR has a lot of kind of like physical downsides to it in comparison to TrackIR. On to visual quality and performance. Now I've put these two items together because they go hand in hand as far as I'm concerned. The visuals are driving performance, and performance is constraining the visuals. I run the VR headset at around 50% of its capacity, so half of its total usable or total renderable capability, and in addition to that I'm running DCS's output at around 50% of what it's capable of. So you need to remember that during this whole conversation about visual quality. Close up in the cockpit, or looking at things that are very close to the viewer, the visuals in VR I think are very good. Everything in the cockpit is readable, provided that you center it in the middle of the lens, because the edges of the lens have lower resolution and the peripheral vision is less sharp than the vision at the center of the lenses. As far as I can see, this screen door effect that people used to talk about is a thing of the past. There is no obvious or even really discernible screen door type effect with me with the G2 headset. The main issue with VR is here, and that is visual fidelity, and resolutions do have to be turned down so low compared to a 2D monitor setup with the same hardware that you will experience a massive loss in visual quality, especially with anything that's more than about a kilometer away from you in DCS. So while flying in VR, my detailed landscape is rendering in at about a kilometer away. So this means I've got this very obvious and jarring delineation between the higher resolution landscapes right close to my aircraft and then the low resolution landscapes which are also rendering in quite close. Now if I push that line out by changing my graphics options, it just becomes too taxing on performance. So I've got this very obvious bubble around me of relatively high detailed landscape, and then beyond that it's just very plain. In addition to that, aircraft which are about 1,000 meters away, about a kilometer away, become almost just a kind of black blur. They've got no real shape, it's just a black smudge. The landscape in the distance is also very fuzzy and blurry, and sometimes it feels like I'm kind of playing with a bad case of hay fever. It's like I'm playing with watery eyes. So the drop in visual quality in this regard is probably more than I actually expected prior to buying the VR headset and trying it for myself. It's quite a difference at medium and long ranges how blurry and fuzzy everything is. Now, this is not just a visual thing, okay? This has an impact on your situational awareness, which we'll discuss a bit later. As for field of view, now there is a limited field of view on a VR headset, certainly more limited than you would get on most monitors, although you can adjust your field of view on a monitor. But this limited field of view on the G2 doesn't bother me at all. I hardly notice it. Some people find it a bit frustrating, but I would happily accept this field of view even on a permanent basis if that meant the other visual quality aspects were going to be improved. It doesn't need to be any more than what I've got on the G2 in terms of field of view to be comfortable. So I would rather the focus then went on improving the performance than adding field of view but having the performance the same. The main constraints I can see are twofold. First, the GPU and CPUs still have some catch up to do in order to allow our PCs, certainly my PC, to bump the graphic options. Noting, like I said earlier on, that I'm running DCS and the G2 at about 50% of what they're capable of. Now, my understanding is that even something like a 3090 graphics card is only going to give me 20 or 30% uplift in performance, which probably doesn't justify getting that kind of card yet. I still think we might be a whole generation of GPUs away from really being able to push the headsets to what they're capable of. In addition, DCS itself does seem like a real beast when it comes to VR. So you're rendering two whole DCS outputs essentially, one for each eye, and that is a very, very steep mountain for DCS to climb, it seems. So I would say there's probably the need for some kind of dedicated VR optimizations within DCS itself. I'm not the first person to say this, but I don't know what those kinds of optimizations would be. I would like to see about 20 to 25% performance uplift with what DCS is pumping out. I don't know if the much discussed and promised Vulkan implementation will get us there. I personally doubt it, and I think that we are going to be reliant on the next generation of hardware really to make DCS really perform in VR. General flying. So this is all the flying except for the combat related stuff. Now this is where VR excels, and I would say VR here excels beyond my expectations. The sensation you get when you spawn into the cockpit and you look around that first time is pretty remarkable. So there's this instant recognition of the 3D space by your brain. Your brain just knows exactly what it is looking at, and it is so familiar from your real world experiences that it just clicks instantly, and it's almost like this satisfying reward system in your brain. I don't know what it is, but spatially my brain just absolutely loved it. I looked over the side of the cockpit down to the ground below. You know, you tip the wing over and you can see down, and you've got this instant recognition of the distance between objects and the overall 3D environment, and it is really, really fantastic. When you push the nose over going into a dive, your whole body kind of wants to react against this impending change in G, which actually never happens. So you kind of, this part of your brain tries to brace your body for this change in G. Of course, there is no change in G because you're just sitting in your seat in your home. But there's this really interesting sensations go on when using the VR headset in general flight. I even found taxiing to be a whole new experience. So I find myself anticipating these forces on my body that never materialize because my brain is so convinced that I'm about to feel myself being pushed about, taxiing, you know, moving left and right and accelerating and then coming to a halt. It's really, really interesting. You soon realize how much more realistic the aircraft handling has been modeled when you are in VR. And there are lots of complaints, and I've expressed them before, about the way aircraft feel. And a lot of that is related to this absence of sensation that you get, particularly from a 2D monitor. And there are lots of these kind of classic gamer complaints about aircraft handling, both in the air and on the ground. And I think a lot of that is tied to our experience with 2D monitors. We simply don't get these visual cues to our brain that we do get from stereoscopic vision. And so VR brings all that into your gaming experience. And taxiing around in particular is just totally different. It's very, very cool. Judging distance to other objects and other aircraft is far easier. I'm not the first to say this. I can taxi the aircraft, I can park, I can fly far closer to things that I ever could using TrackIR and a 2D monitor. Formation flying is significantly easier, and having those stereoscopic inputs going into your brain makes a big difference when it comes to judging distances, relative motion, and the orientations of other objects. So the general flying experience for me in VR is unparalleled to anything I've ever tried before. Combat flying then, the big one. This is a bit of a mixed bag at the moment, but I think it will get better with some time. Long range contact spotting is a bit hit or miss. So some players are reporting that they can see contacts at about the same range on VR headsets as they can on a monitor. I think personally that I've lost about a third of my contact spotting range. So this is the point where you can initially say there is or is not an aircraft in the sky. Simply spotting the contact. Now on a monitor, and I've made videos about this in the past, I can usually pick up a horizon contact at about 25 to 30 kilometers under reasonable conditions. However, in VR, I think I'm down to about 10, 15, maybe 20 kilometers range. So about half of the previous range, or about 2/3 of it. Now, this is still, I think, within reasonable ranges compared to real life, probably, and it's also reasonable enough to act or react to a contact that you've seen, because you're not really engaged yet at those sorts of distances. So it doesn't really harm, I don't think, my combat flying. Contact identification then, as opposed to spotting, is significantly harder with VR. Now, it's not usually until they are very close that I can now tell what type an aircraft it is. So this is happening now around the 1K mark, and I think on a 2D monitor with TrackIR, I was able to pick out types at 3 to 5 kilometers range. In the VR headset, everything just seems to be a bit of a fuzzy black smudge until it's quite close, as I said earlier on in the video. Now there is a couple of zoom functions, one sort of a telescopic zoom. You can basically just switch between zoomed in and zoomed out. It's not a dynamic field of view adjustment like you can do with a 2D monitor. It's quite good. It probably adds about another kilometer to my identification range, but you sacrifice a lot of other things when you're zoomed in, so you can't really stick around with the view zoomed in. Now, once you're in a close dogfight, I think VR undoubtedly results in better judgment. So you are able to better judge your position, and you're better able to judge the movement of other close by aircraft. So this also means that your shooting is improved, your evasive flying, I think, is improved, especially your ability to get down amongst trees, which I've now been able to do a few times since getting VR. I find myself dropping much further down. In fact, flying between the trees when I'm flying evasive and trying to escape, rather than kind of flying above them. So judging your distance to other objects, much easier in VR. Growling Sidewinder, he's also talked about his experience of shooting in VR, which he says is improved, and I would argue the same for me. I think having the VR headset allows for two primary things. The first is that it is much easier now to tell when you are on a target. So this is irrespective of it's a deflection shot or not. There is simply less guesswork involved in knowing when your guns are going to connect. And I think you require less game familiarity. And what I mean by game familiarity is the skill of kind of learning how a game works. Now, there are some games which are supposed to kind of replicate real life, and you always think, well, if I use my real life skills in the game, I should be more successful. And then over time you realize, actually, I just need to learn the game mechanics, or I need to become familiar with the game in order to be better at the game. Well, I think with VR, it helps you translate your real life spatial orientation skills into the game. So it's less about learning how the game works, which I think is more of a kind of 2D monitor skill. You know, you line up the aircraft on a specific part of your screen or what have you. It's much more intuitive. You can kind of feel when your aircraft is on the target. The corollary of this, and this is the second point, is that you can also then tell when you are not on much quicker. So I find myself making far shorter bursts of fire, particularly when I'm not in a great firing position, because I can realize now much sooner that I'm not on, that I'm not going to achieve a solution, and this means that I can better conserve my ammo and have higher overall accuracy. Now, I do have a problem with learning, or should I probably say relearning, how to track aircraft in combat with my eyes, and in particular avoiding various bits of the canopy and the cockpit frame constantly getting in the way. Now, in addition to that, DCS does allow the player's head to slip kind of out of the confines of the closed cockpit to a degree, and I find this lack of limitation incredibly frustrating in flight, because it seems to result in simply more pieces of the aircraft frame sitting right in front of my eyeballs constantly. Now, in real life, you wouldn't press your face right up against the armored plating or something, or the frame of the cockpit, right? You would move your head slightly, or you would move the aircraft into a position that allows you to see what you want to see. This might be partly related to the reduced field of view, is that bits of frame just pop into your periphery, and then they're right in front of you, and they're right close, and you get a face full of, metal plating or something. I find that really frustrating in DCS with VR. It's something I'm going to have to kind of learn to adapt to over time, but the absence of these head movement limits don't help at all in that regard. Checking 6 with the VR headset is much harder. So there are a couple of reasons why that's the case. The first one is the reduced visual fidelity, which just means spotting things is not as easy. And this one-to-one head movement means it is physically more difficult to move your head into a position where you are looking at things. Now, overall, this has contributed, I think, to a significant loss of situational awareness for me in a fight. And I can tell when I go back and look at my replays now on a 2D monitor, there are things that I simply could not see flying in the VR that I can see quite easily on the replay on the monitor. So I know I have lost situational awareness. Maneuvering the aircraft then in a fight situation is still something I'm kind of relearning. My natural tendency, which I've noticed in the last few fights, is that I really don't like pointing the nose at the ground and going into a fast dive. This is just something in my brain, and it must be related to this kind of phantom G sensations that I was talking about earlier. I just have this aversion to pointing the nose down and diving rapidly towards the ground. It just feels really uncomfortable. But as time goes by, I'm kind of redeveloping my combat and maneuvering skills and trying to just push through that weird sensation when you push the nose forward. I think the overall result, once I iron out a few kind of learning issues, will be better energy management and better control of my aircraft in the fight, in addition to the improved shooting. So I think over the next couple of months, my combat flying will improve as a result of moving to VR. So it's time to wrap it all up. Has it been worth it? The answer I have to give is yes. So probably from the content, it seems like I've had a lot of issues and bumped up against a lot of limitations. And that is true, but despite these limitations and issues, the overall immersive nature of VR really works with DCS and really works with the DCS Warbirds. When I consider that playing DCS is for me purely an entertainment activity, I have to conclude that the entertainment is significantly enhanced by moving from TrackIR to VR, and so therefore it has been worth it.